Hello, my name's Nigel Thorne and I'm concerned about the influence of trans-identified males on the Welsh Government LGBTQ Action Plan, a plan heavily supported by Stonewall, Cymru and its allies.
It's hugely significant that the Welsh Government has not only produced a plan, but has produced one that is measurable, costed, is actually going to be something we can judge them by.
Yeah, I mean, it's a very significant moment for Wales. It's being launched during LGBTQ Action History Month, which is fantastic. And it's a landmark document and policy for us here in Wales.
It's really great to be doing this. When I look back over the stuff that we've had in the past and some of the troubles that parts of our community face now, and a rising tide of anti-LGBTQ feeling and horrific anti-trans feeling, it's really special that the Welsh Government is standing up to be counted for all of its citizens.
We've seen so many things that have been implemented already as part of the action plans. We've seen the HIV action plan, for example. We've started to see the RSE curriculum be implemented in schools. So there's many things that we've seen happen as part of this action plan, but it is very much a first step. And I do think that we shouldn't become complacent. We really need to make sure that we implement the plan to the best of our abilities and ensure that the needs of LGBTQ+ people across Wales are met.
There's a lot of hot air from politicians, especially around lip service to the LGBTQ+ community. Here in Wales, the government is putting its planning, its money, its services where its mouth is. That's different, that's important.
This is a really important plan for LGBTQ+ communities here in Wales, and I think that it's really important that all of us are aware of it.
I do a lot of international work, and people from other countries, particularly other countries in Europe, are really noticing that Wales is trying to fulfil its ambition to be the best country in the world for LGBTQ+ people. It feels really good to be in Wales, to be part of this.
In March 2023, a Cabinet paper, publication of the LGBTQ Action Plan for Wales, was published. In the summary section of the paper, it reads, officials have worked collaboratively with a wide range of representatives from LGBTQ communities, as well as the LGBTQ expert panel, to inform the development of the LGBTQ Action Plan. In the ministerial foreword to the Action Plan, Hannah Blythen wrote, we know we need to ensure the voices and lived experiences of LGBTQ+ people need to be not just heard, but acted upon. The way in which we developed this plan made sure that these personal stories and experiences were written into this work. The lived experiences of several trans-identified males, either directly or indirectly, have had a huge influence on the development of the plan. One of those trans-identified males is Kate Hutchinson, a member of the LGBTQ Action Panel. Hutchinson is a trans-identified male who transitioned in 2012. He is a trustee for Schools Out UK.
So I do other work for another charity called Schools Out, and one of our sort of little taglines is about educating out prejudice, getting rid of that prejudice by increasing people's understanding of it, you know.
Schools Out UK are the organisation responsible for making February LGBT+ History Month. Indeed, their website address redirects to the LGBT+ History Month website. They are strongly opposed to gender-critical viewpoints and retweeted a critique of the works of three gender-critical authors: Helen, Joyce, formerly of The Economist, former philosophy professor at Sussex University, Kathleen Stock, and feminist author Julie Bindel. The author of the critical essay was academic and trans-identified male Grace Lavery, a colourful character and author of Please Miss, a heartbreaking work of staggering penis. Lavery has previously defined a woman as a person who is, or has been, presumed to adopt a passive role in sexual intercourse and a reproductive role in economic life. He concedes that the definition is not perfect. Lavery has also tweeted, TERFs think that everyone secretly thinks trans women are men and that they'll win because of it. I think that everyone is secretly as much of a pervert as we are, and we'll win because of it. In July 2023, at the Pink News Welsh Summer Parliamentary reception held in the Senedd, Hutchinson spoke in favour of the social transition of trans and non-binary children.
The teacher needs to feel supported at every point of working with those young people. It's about making sure those young people get the same opportunities as every other child in school to achieve, to learn. Because if we're not supporting them in their identity, which is a core part of who they are, we are not giving them the same opportunities.
In contrast, in the interim service specification produced by NHS England, it states, the ability to express individuality and autonomy to change and adapt that expression over time can be important to a child or young person's development of the self and to their overall well-being. However, due to the social and psychological implications that social transition may have, advice about social transition should be seen as informing a significant decision when it forms part of an individual's care. While there are different views on the benefits versus the harms of early social transition, it is important to acknowledge that it is not a neutral act and that information is needed about long-term outcomes to support decision-making. Information and discussion about this with the multidisciplinary team is an important part of supporting a child or young person in the service. Hutchinson is not in favour of it being mandatory for schools to inform parents of their child's social transition. Hutchinson believes that the administration of puberty blockers for children with gender distress is like pressing a pause button.
A young person from the age of 12, possibly, if they have actually started to go into puberty and they're showing levels of distress because of that, they may be prescribed hormone blockers, which are a thing that puts puberty on hold. It's like pressing the pause button.
Hutchinson is an advisor to the Welsh Government and has delivered presentations on trans and non-binary inclusion in Welsh education. Cat Burden is a trans-identified male who transitioned at the age of 62. He is a member of the LGBTQ Action Panel. In a podcast, Burden explained,
what we must avoid is the simple fact that the protests against us being female or male are using Year 11 science to try and justify their arguments. They are quite literally saying chromosomes are king. If you're XX, you're female. If you're XY, you're male. And that's utter rubbish.
Fertility expert Professor Robert Winston disagrees.
I will say this categorically, that you cannot change your sex. Your sex actually is there in every single cell in the body. You have a chromosomal sex, you have genetic sex, you have hormonal sex, you have all sorts of different kinds of psychological, brain sex, they're all different. And we are very confused about this, unfortunately, and regrettably, it's got into this argument that people are will now accuse me of being transphobic.
Well, obviously, there are trans people who say you absolutely can do that.
Well, unfortunately, you can't say this publicly. This is one of the big problems. Even saying this on this programme undoubtedly will result in my getting a huge amount of hate mail. It always does. But I do think it's a big issue about the attitudes. There are, of course, issues which are important about young people who are confused about their sex, but we won't go down that route here. But it does affect a whole lot of issues in schools and elsewhere in our society. Of course, we should accept people as they are. Overall, I think it's a very sad thing that we can't discuss biological science without actually getting completely caught up emotionally with something which is really completely wrong.
Well, as I say...
In a tweet, Burden also references an article by Grace Lavery titled, "A High Court decision in Britain puts trans people everywhere at risk. The so-called gender-critical movement is illogical, anti-feminist and cruel." This was an article that was critical of the original High Court decision in the Keira Bell case that declared that children under the age of 16 have enormous difficulties in meeting the standard for informed consent that would allow them to take puberty blockers. The article, arguing that the gender-critical movement was cruel, was accompanied by a picture of trans rights campaigner Sarah Jane Baker, who was jailed for 30 years after inflicting acts on a 19-year-old man that the judge at his trial described as an exercise in sadism and cruelty which may well have led to his death. Baker was recalled to prison after encouraging violence against gender-critical women.
I was going to come here and be really fluffy and be really nice and say, yeah, be really lovely and queer and gay. No, if you see a TERF, punch him in the fucking face.
The action plan cites research from Florence Ashley to argue that delaying or preventing a person from having their identity respected can have a negative impact on their lives. Florence Ashley is a trans-feminine academic, activist and law professor at the University of Alberta, who came out as trans in 2015. He is attracted to males. In the cited article, it states, unbounded social transition and ready access to puberty blockers ought to be treated as the default option, and support should be offered to parents who have difficulty accepting their youth. In contrast, as reported by Transgender Trend, the findings of a 2013 research study by Dr. Thomas Steinsma from the Netherlands indicated that social transition is the most powerful predictor of persistence of childhood gender dysphoria. There's now strong evidence that puberty blockers also increase persistence, as reported at the 2016 WPATH conference, presentation by Tavistock GID staff. Ashley's new book, Gender Fucking, The Pleasures and Politics of Living in a Gendered Body, will be released in 2024. An excerpt from the book reads, over the last few years, I've been writing about the conviction among cis parents that being trans is a social contagion that has climbed to heights of pandemic proportion. I have dedicated myself to proving the fallacy of the suggestion. Writing these words, I firmly believe that they are wrong. But as I reflect on embodying T4T, trans for trans, I can't help but wonder whether fertile avenues of understanding may be opened up by thinking trans as contagious, as a sexually transmissible condition. Though I would never adopt it in my legal or bioethical scholarship, I suspect it holds the seeds of a poetic, effective truth. I fuck, date and love trans girls. I fuck, date and love trans girls even when neither of us knows we are. I love them before they come out, holding open the possibility that every cis person is at the stage of becoming towards transness. I love them so much I make trans girls. It may not be quite true, but I feel it in my bones. In contrast, in 2020, eminent Professor Dr. Stephen Levine, testifying in front of the Pennsylvania Health Committee, argued that the recent increase in the number of trans-identifying children and adolescents was a social contagion.
I first encountered a patient suffering from what we now call gender dysphoria in July 1973. In 1974, I founded the Case Western Reserve University Gender Identity Clinic. I was an early member of the Harry Benjamin International Gender Dysphoria Association, which today is known as WPATH. I served as the chairman of the Standards of Care Committee for WPATH. Contrary to hopes that medicine and society can fulfill the aspiration of the trans individual to become a complete man or a complete woman, this is not biologically attainable. Indeed, the aspiration to become a complete man or woman is not even attainable in the trans person's private subjective self. First perspective, some speak of gender dysphoria as though it were a curable physical mental illness that causes endless suffering. It should be noted, however, that gender dysphoria is not a medical disease, it's a psychiatric illness. There is no physical or biologic or specific abnormality of the sex organs or the brain at this point in our knowledge among these individuals. And since doctors gave up performing lobotomies to treat psychiatric disorders many decades ago, gender dysphoria is the only psychiatric diagnosis which doctors are attempting to treat by surgery. The second way of looking at gender dysphoria is in developmental terms. We could call that a developmental model. In a young child, we would view attraction to a transgender identity as likely as an adaptation to a psychological problem that was first manifested as a failure to establish a comfortable, conventional sense of self in early childhood. In an adolescent, clinicians would look for fear or a sense of failure associated with the roles that the individual associates with his or her biologic sex. In other words, we're very thoughtful about the things that a child may misunderstand, may not have lived long enough to grasp yet. Many young children, trans-identified boys, think that males can only exist in this range of behavior, whereas when they're older, they will understand you can be a man in any one of these ways. And similarly for girls. This is a child's thinking, not a grown-up's thinking. Some strident advocates oppose the developmental view, asserting that trans identity is biologically caused and it's unchangeable. But this is not supported by science. Recent sudden changes in the numbers and makeup of those experiencing gender dysphoria strongly suggest a cultural or a sociologic rather than a biologic cause, because the genetic makeup of our species does not change over a 20-year period.
In response to a question put to him in the South Chamber by Conservative Senate member Laura Ann Jones, the First Minister responded that the Welsh Government had a broader set of evidence than that made available to Dr. Hilary Cass.
WISC intend to ask for expressions of interests from those in the field for a gender identity development service for Wales, and that will be informed by the Cass Review, by the conversations that we will have with Dr. Cass, but also by a broader set of evidence that we have here in Wales.
One could be forgiven for thinking that this evidence is tainted by ideological bias. The Action Plan references a study by Durwood et al. From 2017 and Olson et al. From 2016 to argue that social transition has shown positive mental health outcomes, as if the science was settled. A study was published in April 2023 titled, "Is Social Gender Transition Associated with Mental Health Status in Children and Adolescents with Gender Dysphoria?" One of the authors was Polly Carmichael, the service director at GIDS, the Gender Identity Clinic at the Tavistock. The author stated, "The most widely cited quantitative studies assessing mental health in social gender transition are those by Durwood et al. 2017 and Olson et al. 2016. The authors also stated, "Other recent studies, however, have failed to find superior well-being in socially transitioned young people." In the action plan, it states that being transgender should be celebrated, and the cited research is among the many reasons that encourage us to do more and to continue to develop our gender services for adults in Wales and to consider options for the development of a gender service for young people in Wales. The gender service for adults in Wales uses a highly gender affirmative approach. There is no reference in the action plan to those who regret transition. The gender identity service being developed in Wales mirrors the dominant model used within the United States. Rachel Levine is a late transitioning trans-identified male and the United States Assistant Secretary for Health. His comments in an interview discussed during an interview between Megyn Kelly and Helen Joyce.
We mentioned Rachel Levine earlier, a man who lived his whole life as a man and then in his 50s declared that he was a woman, and now he's calling himself the first female admiral to ever work for HHS, all of which is a lie. He's still a man. He's just dressing as a woman now. And he gave an extraordinary interview to ABC just this past weekend, I think it was in this past week, and had the following assertions. He did not trans as a child. He married a woman. He had children. He earlier is on record as saying he's glad that he waited because he wouldn't have had his children if he had gone trans before he did. But now a bit of change in his messaging. He'd love for your kids or mine to stop puberty and cross sex with all these procedures. Listen to Rachel Levine's that one.
The treatment options for gender-affirming care for transgender youth really are evidence-based.
What would you say to folks who think that they're being reasonable by saying, why can't children just wait till they're 18?
Adolescence is hard and puberty is hard. What if you're going through the wrong puberty? What if you inside feel that you are female, but now you're going through a male puberty?
The argument is, well, they're too young to know.
I want to make it clear that for prepubertal children, there are no medical procedures done. The standard of care allows them to explore that with therapy.
When you speak out against these bills, what do you cite as the harm?
Well, gender-affirming care is medical care. Gender-affirming care is mental health care. Gender-affirming care is literally suicide prevention care.
We'll get to the suicide claim, but take on, Helen, that prepubertal children are not given any medical procedures or care. That's not true.
I really hate everything about that interview. I think every single sentence that Rachel Levine said is false. And the fact that he is asking for children or saying that children should be given something that he did not have himself, why is he doing that? You know, what about his own identity requires him to use children as child sacrifices like this? Yes. I mean, you know, I was brought up Catholic. I am no longer a believer, but I turn to the words of the Bible when I see things like that. And I say, better that you tie a millstone around your neck and cast yourself into the sea than that you harm children like this. It's disgusting, absolutely disgusting to be harming children in order to prop up and validate adult identities. And that's what I am seeing there. Right, rant over and I'll answer your actual question. So what they do is they use a bunch of half-truths and outright deceptions and assertions without any evidence, and they stitch it together to say, okay, first, nobody's doing irreversible things to prepubescent children. And what they're ignoring is what we know about childhood development, which is that if you tell a little boy who ardently wishes that he was really a girl, that yes, he can be a girl, and you're going to call him a girl's name, tell everybody that he's a girl, dress him in girls' clothes, you're going to get away with it because you can turn little boys into something that looks like little girls, because prepubescent children, you know, it's easy to present them as a member of the opposite sex. That kid gets what he wants. He gets to play with the toys that he wanted that you said to him weren't suitable for boys. Like, why the hell didn't you just say, it's fine, you can play with Barbie. You're a boy, but you can play with Barbie. Anyway, then puberty approaches. What's that child going to do? Going to go like, all right, fine, I'm going to grow hair on my chest and my voice is going to break and I'm going to shoot up and, you know, I'm just going to look like a boy. No, you've been pretending for the past 5 years that he's really a girl. You've put him on a path that's very, very hard to get off, even if technically you haven't done something irreversible. Then the next lie they say is that puberty blockers are reversible, that they're just a pause button, that they just give you time to think. What they actually do, we know this now, is they lock in the social transition. Children who go on puberty blockers, almost all, like 98%, go on to cross-sex hormones. So they are absolutely not a pause button, and they're probably bad for you in themselves. I mean, you've got children, I've got children. Puberty is a really special time. So much changes in a child in puberty. It's actually, you know, it's almost awe-inspiring. I only have boys, and watching them go through that, what looks like that fast-forward video of the tree shooting up, you know, it's amazing. I look at it and I think, wow, you know, human biology is incredible. Look what's happened. A child is turning into a man. And these wicked, wicked people want to interfere with that process. It harms your brain, it harms all sorts of things. We probably don't know all the ways that it harms you, but it puts you on a path to cross-sex hormones. And the last thing that I'm going to say about this is that if you stop a child's puberty right at the beginning of it, that's stopping the child before the child goes through any pubertal development. So the little boy's penis is tiny. He's not getting erections. He's not getting wet dreams. The girl hasn't become fully orgasmic if it's a girl. And you put them on this puberty blocker and then they go straight on to cross-sex hormones. You're not just creating somebody who might look like a member of the opposite sex when they've got no clothes on. You're creating somebody who is kind of asexual, somebody who is not going to have normal orgasms, someone who is not just infertile, but sterile. You're creating a human being who can never be a normal adult. And when that little boy, his penis will never become a full-size penis if you go down this path. I mean, it is a human rights abuse of the sort that we look back on lobotomies and we say, how did that ever happen? Yes. We're doing like sex lobotomies, and we're doing them on children, and we're doing them probably to tens of thousands of children invisibly in clinics all over America and all over the English-speaking world. And it is the medical scandal of the 21st century and the human rights abuse of the developed world of the 21st century.
Detransitioner Chloe Cole spoke about her experiences in front of the United States Congress.
My name is Chloe Cole, and I am a detransitioner. Another way to put that would be, I used to believe that I was born in the wrong body, and the adults in my life whom I trusted affirmed my belief, and this caused me lifelong, irreversible harm. I speak to you today as a victim of one of the biggest medical scandals in the history of the United States of America. I speak to you in the hope that you will have the courage to bring the scandal to an end and ensure that other vulnerable teenagers, children, and young adults don't go through what I went through. At the age of 12, I began to experience what my medical team would later diagnose as gender dysphoria. I was well into an early puberty, and I was very uncomfortable with the changes that were happening to my body. I was intimidated by male attention, and when I told my parents that I felt like a boy, in retrospect, all I meant was that I hated puberty, that I wanted this newfound sexual attention to go away, that I looked up to my brothers a little bit more than I did to my sisters. I came out as transgender in a letter I sent on the dining room table. My parents were immediately concerned. They felt like they needed to get outside help from medical professionals, but this proved to be a mistake. It immediately set our entire family down a path of ideologically motivated deceit and coercion. The gender specialist I was taken to see told my parents that I needed to be put on puberty-blocking drugs right away. They asked my parents a simple question: would you rather have a dead daughter or a living transgender son? The choice was enough for my parents to let their guard down, and in retrospect, I can't blame them. This was the moment that we all became victims of so-called gender-affirming care. I was fast-tracked onto puberty blockers and then testosterone. The resulting menopausal-like hot flashes made focusing on school impossible. I still get joint pains and weird pops in my back, but they were far worse when I was on the blockers. A month later, when I was 13, I had my first testosterone injection. It's caused permanent changes to my body. My voice will forever be deeper, my jawline sharper, my nose longer, my bone structure permanently masculinized, my Adam's apple more prominent, my fertility unknown. I look in the mirror sometimes and I feel like a monster. I had a double mastectomy at 15. They tested my amputated breast for cancer. And I was cancer-free, of course. I was perfectly healthy. There was nothing wrong with my still developing body or my breasts, other than that, as an insecure teenage girl, I felt awkward about it. After my breasts were taken away from me, the tissue was incinerated. Before I was able to legally drive, I had a huge part of my future womanhood taken from me. I will never be able to breastfeed. I struggle to look at myself in the mirror at times. I still struggle to this day with sexual dysfunction. And I have massive scars across my chest. And the skin grafts that they took of my nipples are weeping fluid today. And they were grafted into a more masculine positioning, they said. After surgery, my grades in school plummeted. Everything that I went through did nothing to address my underlying mental health issues that I had. And my doctors, with their theories on gender, thought that all my problems would go away as soon as I was surgically transformed into something that vaguely resembled a boy. Their theories were wrong. The drugs and surgeries changed my body, but they did not and could not change the basic reality that I am and forever will be a female. When my specialist first told my parents that they could have a dead daughter or a live transgender son, I wasn't suicidal. I was a happy child who struggled because she was different. However, at 16, after my surgery, I did become suicidal. I'm doing better now, but my parents almost got the dead daughter promised to them by my doctors. My doctors had almost created the very nightmare they said they were trying to avoid. So what message do I want to bring to American teenagers and their families? I didn't need to be lied to. I needed compassion. I needed to be loved. I needed to be given therapy to help me work through my issues, not affirm to my delusion that by transforming into a boy, it would solve all my problems. We need to stop telling 12-year-olds that they were born wrong, that they are right to reject their own bodies and feel uncomfortable with their own skin. We need to stop telling children that puberty is an option, that they can choose what kind of puberty they will go through, just so they can choose what clothes to wear or what music to listen to. Puberty is a rite of passage to adulthood, not a disease to be mitigated. Today, I should be at home with my family celebrating my 19th birthday, and instead I'm making a desperate plea to my elected representatives. Learn the lessons from other medical scandals like the opioid crisis, to recognize that doctors are human too, and sometimes they are wrong. My childhood was ruined along with thousands of detransitioners that I know through our networks. This needs to stop. You alone can stop it. Enough children have already been victimized by this barbaric pseudoscience. Please let me be your final warning. Thank you.
Today's your birthday?
It is.
You're a beautiful, brave woman. Thank you for being here.
Sex researcher James Cantor states, lived experience is not lived experience. It's a subjective interpretation of memory, tinted by powerful emotional lenses. Those parents who would prefer that the Welsh Government develop policy based on evidence rather than lived experience may wish to support Public Child Protection Wales. Links are included below.